Get in, loser, we're learning sewing. To get started to learn how to sew, you're really only going to need a couple things. You're definitely going to need a sewing machine and then thread and fabric, but we'll get to that later. And then you're going to need a pattern. There are a couple different ways to learn how to sew. If you took home ec or something like that, you probably learned all of the skills, all of the different kinds of techniques and stuff like that before you got to making like an actual garment. You probably learned making little small things like little cushions and stuff like that. Personally, I don't learn very well that way, so I'm not going to teach you that way. The way I learned and the way that I generally tend to learn best is by jumping into a project. So that's where a pattern comes into play. I don't recommend this pattern to start with because it's rather complicated. Try to get something that's like a little breezier, like try a shirt or like a basic blouse, something like that. You want it to be something that you're gonna wear, something that you're gonna be proud to wear, something that you're gonna be like, thanks, I made it. You don't want to bite off more than you can chew or you're gonna get really frustrated and you're gonna hate your life and you're gonna hate sewing. And sewing is really fun, as long as you step up incrementally and don't bite off more than you can chew. I recommend a dress, I recommend a shirt, maybe not like a button shirt, just like a blouse. There are a lot of cute peasant blouse patterns that I've seen. The newest season that I've seen of like Simplicity, their patterns tend to be a little breezy and don't have a ton of structure. So I really recommend those. I especially recommend something that you can use cotton or a non-knit material. Knit materials are stretchy, and so sometimes that can be a little difficult when you're sewing. Any publicly published pattern, McCall's, Simplicity, Berta, they have been reviewed, they've been pattern tested. They are relatively inexpensive and you can trust them to have the information that you're probably going to need in order to get started sewing. Once you have a pattern, you have something you know you're gonna wanna make, you're gonna have to measure yourself. And the measurements for most commercial patterns, they're gonna have measurements listed for bust, waist, hips. For your waist, you really wanna measure the smallest part of your body. Your bust, you wanna go at the widest part of your chest and make sure you're staying parallel to the floor. It really helps to have a friend help you out with this, honestly. You don't wanna pull anything too tight or your garment's gonna fit too tight. Hips, this one's a little weird. If you put your hands on your hips right here, this is not where you're measuring. You actually want, as my mom and gran told me, you want the fattest part of your butt. So for me, my hips are like down here. They're real low. They're a lot lower than you would think. You want like the widest part of you to be what you're measuring. And those measurements are gonna help you decide which size of this pattern you're gonna need and how much fabric you're gonna need to get. Most commercial patterns are sold in big chunks of sizes. This one has 2 different envelopes. You either buy the one that goes from 6 to 14 or the one that goes from 14 to 20. Don't use your normal dress size. You'll likely find that the number of size that you are is quite a bit larger than the number of size you would be if you just like went to Macy's and got a dress. On this little chart, your size is gonna help you determine how much fabric you need. So you really wanna do this before you buy fabric. Sometimes the variance is quite a bit. Usually it's not that much. The difference between a size 8 and a size 20 on this pattern is nothing at all. You'll need 12 and 5/8 yards regardless of size. All those little lines are the different sizes. So the differences between the size on each pattern piece are rather small. The difference of fabric that one size takes up versus another is generally pretty minimal. Personally, one of my favorite patterns is this one. It's from McCall's. It makes a little romper. It's really easy and you do learn a lot of techniques while making it. It doesn't take a ton of fabric, at least for the version with shorts. You're gonna learn how to do a lining. You're gonna learn how to make like a structured bodice, how to gather. There's a couple different skills that you're going to learn while sewing this pattern. Personally, I like to get PDF patterns because I can print them off at home. I find that this is a lot easier than dealing with the patterns that you get in a packet like this. When you get a pattern in a packet like this in a little envelope, I have already used this, so I put it away badly. It usually fits in here very nicely. But the pattern pieces are gonna come out printed on this tissue paper. This tissue paper has all the markings you're gonna need to make your garment. For me personally, this is flimsy. It's likely to tear. It just makes me a little bit nervous. It feels very fragile and it's a little bit unwieldy. There's like all these pieces and it's difficult to deal with. This is why I like to get a PDF pattern and I like to print it off at home. That way you have something a little bit more like this. This is how I store my patterns. The benefit of printing them off at home is they're going to be printed on normal printer paper. So when you're all done, they can kind of fold and store into a nice little letter-sized piece of paper. I store mine binder clipped together, so I know that all the pattern pieces for this pattern have been included in here. I will say, and I've made other videos about this, if I get a PDF pattern, I retrace the whole pattern in Adobe Illustrator. You don't need to do that. If you have access to Illustrator and you are particularly skilled with Adobe Illustrator, it does make printing them off easier and making modifications to them easier later, but I do not recommend this for a beginner. It's a whole lot of nonsense. It takes a long time. I would just get a PDF pattern, print it off, tape it together. It usually has instructions on how it wants you to tape it together, and every pattern or designer kind of does their printed patterns a little bit differently, so you want to follow instructions. But you'll wind up with pattern pieces that look basically like this. You know, it's just pieces of paper taped together, then there's an outline, you cut it out. And some of them have little markings on them. Those are important. You're going to need to transfer those marks onto the fabric. And let's talk about fabric. The best part about getting a commercially printed pattern like McCall's, Butterick, Simplicity, luckily these are all on the same website now, is that they're gonna have this really helpful yardage and fabric guide on the back. So this little guide is going to show you the type of fabric you need for this pattern. And this is relatively important. If you get a pattern for like a little knit dress and you decide to make it out of broadcloth, it's not gonna stretch. And if the pattern wants stretch, it won't fit you very well and it's gonna look really weird. Even if you size up a little bit, it's just gonna look weird. So you're gonna want to go by the list of fabrics that it gives. Luckily with the internet, if you're buying fabric online and you don't really know what to purchase, you can just take those, how they describe the fabric. The one I am looking at in my hand right now says to use novelty lightweight brocade, silk, or taffeta. And then the lining, it wants cotton or cotton blends. Super easy. So I'm just going to search whatever fabric site I want to search for those things. For beginners, I really recommend starting out with inexpensive fabric. I really recommend Fabric Wholesale Direct, and you can use my link below to get $10 off. They're not sponsoring this video or anything. I've just shopped with them enough that I have one of those little affiliate links. There are other good sites. I will say I don't recommend Amazon. You can get fabric on there. In fact, fabric.com used to be a place you could buy fabric and Amazon bought it. It's difficult to search and it's just unwieldy, and I would recommend not going there. Check out local fabric stores. If you have any near you, you can just Google fabric store near me. Online, I really recommend Mood Fabrics is great. They are a little bit pricier, but they have beautiful, incredible fabric. And then Fabric Wholesale Direct. Both these places have really slow shipping. It takes a little bit for them to like cut and pack your order, and it takes a little bit to get to you. So I would assume that that step's gonna take 2 weeks. Okay, still looking at the pattern or the little pattern envelope now. We're gonna move on to notions. Notions are all the silly little additional things that aren't just like needles and fabric to sew your stuff. The one that I have in my hand says for notions, it needs 7 yards of boning. If you find your pattern that you're looking at and it calls for boning, stop. You're not gonna do that one. If you're a beginner sewer, this is your first sewing project, don't put boning in something. You're gonna hate yourself, you're gonna hate your life, and you're gonna hate me. It has some hooks and eyes, it has some single fold bias tape, and then it calls for appliques. So that's just like the additional stuff that it thinks you would need. Usually this is where they're gonna put zippers, this is where they're gonna put ribbons, if you see that there's like a little bow detail or something on your pattern and it's made out of a ribbon, this is where it's gonna list that, and it's gonna say how much you need, how long, how many yards, whatever. So you're gonna wanna buy those. Usually buy them at the same time you buy your fabric. That way it's easy to make sure they match. Like zippers come in a lot of different colors. You usually want your zippers to match your garment. So we have our notions, we have our fabric. What do we have next?
2 weeks later.
Now that you have all your stuff, I'm assuming that 2 weeks have passed for you. Now that you have all your stuff together, luckily you have a pattern and you're just going to follow those instructions. And I mean follow them to a T. You're gonna sit down before you cut anything out. You're just gonna sit down, you're gonna have a beverage, and you're gonna read the instructions. And you're gonna read the instructions all the way through. If it were me, I would mark any places that seem complicated or confusing to you, where you're like, I don't know what that means. Often at the beginning of the instructions, they have a glossary of terms. They will have a bunch of little marks and like what they're gonna mean, because these patterns do have marks on them. They have notches right here, they have dots, rain line. You're gonna wanna know what all of those mean. This is why I recommend starting with a pattern and starting with a commercial pattern like this as opposed to an indie pattern, because it really, a lot of them assume you know nothing, because you likely do know nothing. Probably have seen a bunch of TikToks about sewing and you're like, yo, I want to do that, which is incredible. You should do that. Everyone should know how to sew. It's a good life skill. But you want to make sure you're starting from zero. I hope this wasn't overwhelming. I hope it was a good overall overview of how to get started sewing. I am going to make more of these showing how I would teach someone to sew. If you're interested in learning how to sew, or if you already sew and you want to have a sewing buddy who makes fun projects, please subscribe. And let me know if this video was at all helpful in giving you like a place to start and a direction to go in your learning how to sew journey.